Throughout history, there is one person who has explored the places and people of the past, and has documented historical events that have shaped our world. Her name is Anita Chronicle, History Hunter.
Oh, hello. I've just returned from a very exciting expedition where I happened upon a very interesting village. Here, let me show you some slides I've taken. This house has dirt floors. And here, these women are baking something outside. Looks like bread. These people are very different indeed. Who are they? And where did they come from? Well, almost 400 years ago in 1620, a group of people called Pilgrims settled on the shores of what now is called New England. The Pilgrims left their homes in England and traveled across the Atlantic Ocean to start this new community. The Pilgrims wanted to live in a place where they could practice their religion, separate from the Church of England. My resource guide tells me that these Pilgrims weren't the only people who wanted religious freedom. In fact, the word pilgrim is used to describe anyone who goes on a journey for religious reasons. Now, living in America, you may not understand how important such a journey might be. That's because you already have religious freedom. This is just one of many freedoms Americans share. But it wasn't that way for the Pilgrims. In England, in the 1600s, people could not worship the way they wanted to. Everybody had to belong to the Church of England. People who did not belong to the Church of England were called separatists, and they were treated badly and even arrested for practicing their religion. In 1608, a group of separatists left England and went to Holland. In Holland, they would be able to practice their religion. But even though they could practice their religion, these Pilgrims were not happy in Holland. They could not buy land or work in certain jobs because they were not from Holland, and they wanted their children to be raised English. So, on July 22nd, 1620, the Pilgrims set sail back to England. In England, they got permission from the king to go to the New World and form a colony. A colony is a settlement that is far away from the government that rules it. The Pilgrims would form a settlement, but it would still be ruled by England. With the permission of the king and money from English merchants, the Pilgrims set sail for the New World. I know it's in here somewhere. Ah, here it is. This is a list of all the passengers who left England with the Pilgrims. It seems that over half of the people who took this historic journey were going for some other reason. Some were merchants, some were servants, and some, well, who knows? Maybe they were just looking for adventure. On August 15th, 1620, two ships called the Mayflower and the Speedwell set sail from England. The ships had to turn back twice because of leaks on the Speedwell. Finally, on September 16th, 1620, the Mayflower set sail alone, with 102 passengers aboard. For 2 months, the passengers on the Mayflower survived the many storms at sea. Some people became ill due to seasickness. One man died, and one child was born. Finally, in November of 1620, the Mayflower reached the shores of the New World. The ship was supposed to land near the Hudson River. However, because of dangerous seas, they chose to land on Cape Cod, in what is now the state of Massachusetts. This area was not part of an English colony, so it was not ruled by England. The passengers of the Mayflower knew that they needed to have a government once they left the ship. So they wrote the Mayflower Compact. A compact is an agreement or a contract. Before leaving the Mayflower, the Pilgrims left in groups to explore the coast around Cape Cod. One of these groups found an area of land where Native Americans had once lived. The area had a stream, a high hill, and land that had already been cleared. The Pilgrims decided to make this area their new home. On December 21st, 1620, the Pilgrims founded Plymouth Plantation. Plymouth was the second English settlement in America, but the first in the area we call New England. Landing in New England at the beginning of winter proved to be very hard for the Pilgrims. Cold weather and frozen soil made it difficult to build homes and find food. Because there was no shelter when the Pilgrims arrived, they stayed on the Mayflower until a shelter could be built on their new land. Of the 102 people who set sail from England on the Mayflower, only 50 survived. 20 of the survivors were children. In the spring of 1621, a Native American named Samoset walked into the Pilgrims' village. Samoset spoke a little English that he had learned from an English fisherman who he had met along the coast of Maine. Samoset returned to the village with Massasoit, the chief of the Wampanoag tribe, and Squanto, an English-speaking member of the tribe. I just happen to know an interesting fact about Squanto. You see, Squanto was not born into the Wampanoag tribe. He was born into the Patuxet tribe. But when he was a young man, he was captured by Spanish fishermen and sold into slavery in Spain. He managed to escape from Spain and lived in England for a few years. Then he moved to Newfoundland and eventually found his way back to his homeland. Unfortunately, when he returned, most of his tribe had died due to disease. The ones who had survived had joined the Wampanoag, and so did he. This was fortunate for the Pilgrims, because Squanto could act as an interpreter. Squanto helped the Wampanoag and Pilgrims communicate with each other. He had helped to put together a peace treaty between the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims. Squanto and the others helped the Pilgrims in many ways. The Pilgrims came from a very different land. They were not used to the natural resources they found in the New World. The Wampanoag, who had lived on this land for thousands of years, taught the Pilgrims how to fish, hunt, and grow food. Squanto helped teach the Pilgrims how to plant corn and fertilize the land with fish. The Pilgrims and the Wampanoag also traded goods. The Pilgrims had tools and blankets to trade. The Wampanoag offered furs and land in return. And two groups agreed to help protect each other from attacks by unfriendly tribes in the area. The Pilgrims and the Wampanoag may have cooperated, but the two groups were very different. Each group had its own religious beliefs. They dressed differently. And they lived in different kinds of shelter. But each group, like all people, had the same basic needs. They needed food, shelter, and clothing. Natural resources from the land and the ocean provided the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag with the things they needed to survive. The Wampanoag tied sticks and branches together and covered them with tree bark to make a shelter called a wetu. The Pilgrims also used trees to build their houses. There weren't any stores in the New World, so the Pilgrims couldn't buy what they needed to build their houses. Instead, the colonists cut down oak trees for the frames of their houses and made clapboards out of the oak and cedar trees. The roofs were made from marsh grass or reeds, and clay was used to fill the walls. The Wampanoag dressed differently from the Pilgrims, but they both used animal skins to make clothes and shoes. The Pilgrims also wore clothes made of linen and wool. You know, when I think of Pilgrims, I think of black clothes with buckles. But according to what I found, the Pilgrims wore clothes of many colors and styles. And boys and girls wore gowns until they were 7 or 8. Then boys would start wearing pants and shirts like their fathers. Very different from what I had imagined. Both the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag fished, hunted, and farmed for their food. And because their village was so small, everybody at Plymouth had to work, even the children. Planting the crops was hard work. Men would spend most of their days in the field, planting many things, but mostly corn, called maize. Boys over the age of 7 were expected to help their fathers raise crops. Men and boys would also fish and hunt. Girls generally stayed at home to work with their mothers. They would help their mothers clean and do other chores. Women grew gardens of seed plants that they had brought from England. Women and girls milked the cows and goats in the village, and were in charge of the cooking. Cooking was a little different in Plymouth. People didn't have ovens inside their homes. When women needed to bake bread, they would use the community oven, located in the center of the village. It was shared by all the women of the plantation. Children in Plymouth had plenty of time to help with chores because there were no schools in the village. However, the Pilgrims thought it was very important to know how to read Scripture from the Bible. So many parents took the time to teach their children how to read and write. Although the children of Plymouth had busy lives working and learning, they also found time for fun. Older children would run races or use sticks to pretend to sword fight. Younger children used bubble pipes to blow bubbles. And children would amuse themselves by teasing each other with riddles. Here's one that stumped me. Let's see if you can figure it out. What is full during the day and empty at night? Give up? Shoes. Although the colonists in Plymouth found ways to have fun, they were very serious about how their village should be run. Like most communities, Plymouth had its own government. The government was set up to help make Plymouth a better and safer place. After signing the Mayflower Compact, the Pilgrims elected John Carver as their first governor. During the first year in Plymouth, John Carver died, and William Bradford became the governor of the colony. The governor and the free men in the colony would meet once a year to discuss problems in Plymouth. But women did not have a role in government of the colony. Even though there were very few people living in Plymouth, there were still laws that had to be followed. When someone broke a law, they were punished. Some criminals would be put to death, but most crimes resulted in a whipping, a fine of money, or sitting in the stocks. The Pilgrims believed that people should be shamed or embarrassed if they committed a crime. They thought this would keep people from committing crimes. The punishment of sitting in the stocks was meant to bring shame. A person's arms and legs would be locked in the stocks, and they would have to sit locked up in front of everyone for several hours. The Pilgrims wanted to keep themselves safe from crime within their community, but they also had to make sure they were safe from outside attackers. Plymouth had a small army called a militia that would protect the village against attacks. Every man between the ages of 16 and 60 had to serve in the militia. These men were trained to use swords and guns called muskets. The Pilgrims also built a large wall called a palisade around their fort and meeting house. Behind the large palisade walls sat cannons ready to defend the people of Plymouth against attack. The colonists at Plymouth Plantation, with the help of Squanto, were able to harvest a crop during their first autumn in the New World. To celebrate, Governor Bradford called for a festival and invited the Wampanoag. They feasted on corn, peas, deer, fish, wild turkey, and other foods. They also played games, sang, and danced. This first harvest celebration has come to be called Thanksgiving. Today, we celebrate Thanksgiving to remember the Pilgrims and to give thanks for all that we have. Following the harvest festival, the Pilgrims found they had very little food left. To make matters worse, their harvest the following year was poor, and they risked starving to death. For almost 2 years, more colonists came to live in Plymouth, but very little food was harvested. The Pilgrims spent this time struggling to keep their colony alive. In 1623, more colonists and supplies arrived from England. That same year, the Pilgrims had their best harvest. They never went hungry again, and their colony began to grow even more. Within 20 years of the Pilgrims' landing at Cape Cod Bay, Plymouth Colony had 8 towns and about 2,500 people. I hope my discoveries have given you a better idea of what life was like for the Pilgrims. Their journey from England that brought them to the shores of the New World. The first winter suffering the loss of half of their village. The hard work and pride that helped them build Plymouth. We've learned that Squanto and other Native Americans helped the Pilgrims survive by teaching them to use the land and all the natural resources surrounding them. And we've seen that even though life in the 1600s was very different from life today, there are some things that are the same. The values of hard work, friendship, cooperation, and courage helped the Pilgrims grow into a successful community. These values are what Americans today try to hold on to. They make our families, our communities, and our country strong. So until next time, this is Anita Chronicle.